Well, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today for today's webinar. I'm Dan Thompson, and I will be your host for today's event. Before today's presentation, we're just going to knock out a couple logistics. So today's presentation is being recorded. It will be distributed to attendees within about 24 hours after the event. There are some Zoom features we'll be using today and would love your participation. I'm sure many of you are familiar with Zoom nowadays though. The Q&A feature at the bottom is for any questions you may have for our panelists today. So if you do have questions, please type them into there. I will see them and I will share them at the, if it's topical at the time, I'll fit them in then. And if not, I'll wait till the end of the presentation. If you have a question that is for a specific panelist, please just type their name at the beginning. I'll make sure to direct the question to them. The chat feature is for general inquiries. So if you want to post anything that all can see, please go ahead and post that in there. And then finally, we always would love to get social with today's event. So if you would like to tweet, please use the hashtag #LearningWithLeo. It was on the opening screen. That's hashtag #LearningWithLeo. We'll follow along as a group. If you do want to follow along with that specific hashtag, just go ahead and search that bar in your little Twitter search bar and click on latest, and it will pop all of the tweets from today to the top. We always believe that we learn best as a community, so we are always happy to hear your thoughts. So that's enough about the logistics and from me, and we're going to get to today's event, which is making evaluations work for you. Obviously, it's a panel webinar. So it's my pleasure to introduce our guest today. And as a little icebreaker and getting to know you in this new Zoom world in which we live, I would like our guests to do me a favor and share with us who may be interrupting our Zoom. As I'm sure you've seen plenty of times already. In the interest of fairness, I'll start first. My wife and I have a couple of cats. There's one hanging out right here. Dexter and Fitz, you may see make an appearance. So our first guest today is Jessica Rucker. Jessica is coordinator of instructional design at Oklahoma State University Center for Health Sciences and works primarily in the College of Osteopathic Medicine there. And she's been there for about 2 years. Hello, Jessica.
Thanks, Dan. Hi, thanks for having me. Some possible interruptions. We have 2 giant dogs, a German Shepherd and a Rottweiler. And sometimes they can just, if they're out in the backyard, can be just unpredictable as far as going off. And so that might be an interruption.
Looking forward to that. And next, we're happy to be joined by Floyd Bennett. Floyd is the Senior Business and Technical Analyst at SUNY Downstate College of Medicine within the Office of Medical Education. Floyd, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. In terms of who might interrupt me, I have a cat named Sophie who is right now at this moment somewhere in one of these window panels sunbathing. But I'm sure that once we get going and she hears my voice, she's going to barge in and she needs to be in the room where the action is happening.
Looking forward to that. And then finally, my pleasure to introduce Austin Rutledge. Austin is with Da Vinci Education, and he is our Manager of Client Educational Development.
Thanks, Dan. So I do have 2 little kiddos, 4 and a 1-year-old, and they always like to kind of just like pop up like right in here. And then a coonhound and a terrier. And so if the coonhound hears something she doesn't like, you would know about it, but hopefully we'll be okay.
Is that why she always barks when we're on calls together? It's my voice is what she doesn't like.
She really likes you, Dan.
That's good to know. Thank you. So, well, thanks again to the 3 of you for joining us, and thanks again to our guests today. A quick overview today will just be really conversational. We want to give Floyd, Jessica, and Austin an opportunity to share their thoughts on evals, how they use them at their university, and the benefits and how they make them count and put them to good use to positively impact their school. So I'm going to start you off with an easy one. And Jessica, I'm going to throw this to you to start. Can you both of you just give me a quick overview of your program, just type of school that you support? How long is the program? How many years is the program? Number of students, just kind of the basics.
Sure. Yeah. So as you mentioned, I work at the Oklahoma State University Center for Health Sciences. That comprises several different programs, graduate programs, healthcare administration, forensics, so forth. I mostly support our College of Osteopathic Medicine, and that is a 4-year program. 2 years are on-campus didactics, pre-clerkship clinical or preclinical experiences, and then that's followed by 2 years of clinical experiences where students are going on rotations at different sites and clinics. Oh, and number of students, there's on average about 115 students, but we're excited actually next year we're going to be welcoming an additional 50 students to the incoming class because we're opening up a sister site at the Cherokee Nation in Tahlequah. So our class size just expanded quite a bit. You're muted, right? Yeah.
I am. How far is Tahlequah located from where you are right now?
I think it's about an hour and 15 minutes or so. Okay. Honestly, I haven't made the drive too much.
Okay. Thank you. And Floyd, same question. Just give us a quick overview of your institution.
Sure. So SUNY Downstate Health Sciences University, pretty long name, but it's made up of a number of different programs, which includes the College of Medicine, which I support. We also have the School of Public Health, the College of Nursing, School of Graduate Studies, and we just recently opened our Center of Healthcare Simulation, Office of Continuing Medical Education, and Graduate Medical Education. Our College of Medicine has a cohort of about 210 students over the course of 4 years. Actually, let me be a little bit more precise with that. For each of the 4 years, we have a cohort of 210 students. And that, like Jessica stated, very similar to OSU. As we get into the clerkship years, which begin in year 3, there's a mixture of clinical and didactics, where we send our students, out to different sites and do their clinical work as well.
So you both have quite a bit of moving parts, and I'm sure that evals can play a part of how you learn about your programs and the different ways that you support it. And that kind of leads into our next question as far as, so just in general, and Austin, feel free to jump in as well, but how do the evaluations, and we're going to look at either one, and you can start where you'd like, both completed by the faculty and students completing course evaluations, what roles do those play in programs that you currently work in, or Austin, in your case, programs you have worked with?
Yeah, so I'd say as most institutions, we have our end of course evaluations to identify those areas of improvement within each course. And like I said, I mostly support the College of Osteopathic Medicine, but a variety of courses, and we're doing course evaluations pretty frequently. Then we have faculty evaluations at the end of each course. And then we have evaluations that faculty complete of students, mostly I would say in our clinical problem solving or CPS sessions. So those are sessions where students are broken off into groups of 5 or 6 with a facilitator, and they're going through different cases and going through those clinical reasoning skills. And after several of those sessions, our facilitators will then complete an evaluation of the students in their group based on a rubric of those clinical reasoning skills. So what's nice about those sessions is that those are mostly just feedback based, and they're not factoring into their grade at all. So that's a main way that students in that scenario can get qualitative feedback that they don't necessarily get in the more written exam-based or basic science preliminary courses. And
when you mentioned that the clinical problem solving, is that in didactics, or is that during their clinical years?
Didactics.
Okay.
So the first 2 years. Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool. And Floyd, same question.
Sure. So I'd like to use the analogy for those that have ever been on a conversation with me, know that I make heavy use of analogies. And especially considering that we're New York based here in Brooklyn, I like to reference pizza. So if you think of a pizza pie, downstate, we're very good at dividing up a pizza pie into many, many, many different slices. So when we talk about evaluations, we talk about specifically evaluations that the faculty does of students. We have our problem-based learning sessions that are divided into 2 separate pieces. One with the clinical skills side and one with medical knowledge. But both evaluations serve the same purpose. We divide our students up into groups of 12 to 14 students, and each faculty, both the CS and the MK, so essentially the students receive 2 different evaluations for the same small group, one from each facilitator in their competencies. And our evaluations are built across a number of different competencies that eventually roll up into the students' report cards. And we also tie a lot of our questions in our evaluations to be in cohesion and have synergy with LCME standards.
Wow, that's really great. And since this is around lunchtime, I'm hungry after the pizza reference as well. Um, Austin, do you want to jump in there too?
Yeah, I just want to point out, like, you know, working with Da Vinci, it's like I'm in the fortunate situation that I get to work with a lot of different types of programs all over the country. You know, mostly medical programs, but also other health sciences educations as well, whether it's a physician's assistant program or other health sciences. And we really do, as Jessica pointed out, we see evaluations used a lot for, you know, those standard course and faculty evaluations that are, you know, in many cases part of an accreditation cycle. And those are really important for improving those courses, you know, each iteration of that course. But we even see clients using them, like Floyd was saying, for assessing students in certain instances, but also some really interesting uses. Even one program I've seen using evals to send out surveys to potential preceptors for clinical sites. And so that's, you know, obviously they have to add those users to the system before they can complete the survey. But because those users get an email and they can click on the link, they never even have to log in. So it's a great way to kind of keep that all in one place. But yeah, there's a lot of really creative uses of evaluations at all of the institutions that I've worked with. And so it's fun to kind of get to see each flavor of that.
Yeah, agreed. And I'm in a similar position. And Floyd, I'm going to go back to what you said there about having, you know, it mapping to competencies and with LCME. Do you I use the word mapping, but do you map them, your surveys or your evals as part of your mapping process, or how do you leverage that information to impact your program?
In this case, I'm not actually making use of the curriculum mapping that is available in Leo, but it is definitely something that we want to leverage in the future. We're in a unique space now where we're at the completion stage of our first full academic year of using Leo, migrating from a number of different systems. We've used survey software to do a bunch of different evaluations and, you know, interactions with the preceptors. Also from the 360 perspective of getting student feedback about the sessions and the events that they've attended. So the way that we actually leverage current, you know, LCME and curricular goals and the curriculum mapping setup that's in Leo, we tend to tie a lot of our questions in our questionnaire through the use of text, with the expectation that we will be exporting that out into, you know, a separate database that we could reference over the course of, you know, a number of years once we get, you know, kind of a panoramic view to really get a sense of, you know, where things are falling and where adjustments need to be made. So we try to be as fluid as possible. But right now, just text, but we will absolutely be in the very near future be looking to literally tie curriculum mapping to questions and evaluations directly.
Very cool. Yeah, that's really interesting. I'm excited to see where that goes and the information you get back on that. Jessica, I'm going to put you on the hot seat again to start a question again. So based on the evals that you've done in your program, what changes have you made? Have you know, over the last, you know, years or several years to your program, or what changes are you anticipating making, or both, if you can speak to both of those based on the, you know, the current evals that you have going on?
Sure. So I'd say one of the changes we've made based on some feedback from students is promoting some stronger or more effective teaching strategies. We see oftentimes in courses time and again that students really like the flipped classroom approach, where lecturers are doing pre-recorded lecture content and then they're using their class time to hone more of those critical thinking skills by applying that content to cases. And so we've seen, like I said, time and again, where students are really appreciating that method and they feel like it's a worthwhile use of their time. And so we kind of point that out to faculty, and even some of our professional development, faculty development, we try to prepare faculty to make that kind of transition and say, this is a really good method, and see if we can improve in that regard. Another change that I'm actually pretty excited about that was pretty recent was that based on the feedback in course evaluations, we ended up changing the course evaluation itself. So originally we had several Likert scale questions, followed by just an open response section. And me, as well as some other instructional designers in our department, were noticing that as we're going through the course evaluations and compiling some summaries, because that's part of our course improvement process, that we put together a summary and some recommendations for course directors on how they can improve. The questions, so the Likert scale questions, like one, for example, would be course organization, and maybe 67% of students would say the course is organized. But then we go down to the open response section, and students, maybe 15 students would say the course was disorganized. And so we get this kind of skewed or kind of unbalanced view, or just based on the comment section, students might say that there's an issue, but then you look back to the Likert scale questions and it just doesn't quite balance out. So we went back and redid a lot of our questions, did some research, looked at some examples from other schools, and we thought, what are we really trying to gather from the course evaluation? How do we measure effective teaching? And so, and how can we structure that open response section to help students give more constructive feedback? So we ended up changing some of those questions, instead of just open comments, to what are 1 to 3 specific strengths of this course? What are 1 to 3 specific ways that the course can be improved to better support your learning? So the way we worded the questions, we felt like was very important as far as putting them in that frame of mind. And then, even just the order of questions, like previously we would ask the general question on what was your overall experience in the course. That might be somewhere in the middle or the end of the questions, but putting that up first gets their initial, most impulsive or accurate response. Whereas if you put it at the end of the course evaluation, you already build in some bias based on the other questions. So it was really interesting to kind of restructure that all, and we're planning to implement that in the upcoming year, and we're excited to see the feedback we'll get from that.
So do you find that with the way that you change some of those questions from the Likert style to the more kind of open-ended questions, that do you get better comments now than you did previously, if you just had the standard kind of comments section at the end? Oh,
definitely. Yes, we've already piloted some of those questions and some other student surveys, and we've seen a dramatic change in the types of responses. And because when it's open, it's you can still get some thoughtful feedback. Of course, I'm not saying it wasn't always helpful, but we felt like you can kind of take some of the emotion out of it. Sometimes students can just use it as a venting space. And so we really wanted to help them be more constructive in the feedback they're giving.
Yeah, I'm sure we've all read the student venting quotes, us and everyone on the webinar today. We've probably seen some really interesting ones in there. I'm sure I'm thinking of a few right now. So Floyd, same question. How do you, or what changes have you made off your evaluations, of what changes are you hoping to make going forward?
Sure. So yeah, with our questions, we've played around with a number of different formats in terms of our questions. At one point, we were a little bit heavier with the open-ended text fields and just allowing free comments to come into play here. But as we're in a bit of a not even transitional, we're in an interesting phase for 2 different reasons. One, we do have upcoming accreditation that we have to prepare for. So we want to make sure we have all our T's crossed, our I's dotted. We want to be able to, from the evaluations that we do receive in a 360 view, is number one, we want to make sure that the curriculum is actually meeting the objectives that we laid out, and that these objectives are in line with LTME and AASE standards. So the feedback that we get with a combination of some multi-select radio buttons, which measure the students and how they are individually meeting their competencies, which ends up on their grade book, and also from the student to instructor perspective or course level. As Jessica said, students can be very, brutally honest, which, we welcome here at SUNY Downstate, because we'll take a look at that. We'll hear things like, maybe a session or particular modality, a problems-based learning session, maybe a little bit too short. Maybe instead of an hour, maybe it needs to be an hour and a half or 2 hours to really go through the materials. It gives us a kind of a mirrored view. It gives us an opportunity to look at the mirror and say, are we, giving them enough study time? Are we giving them maybe too much in terms of pre-reading materials? and then look, kind of an overall global view of our curriculum, because of course understanding that students are not just doing problem-based learning, they're also doing 10 other modalities just in the course of a single semester, and they have 4 other semesters before the academic year is over. So we try to take our information and be as fluid as possible in terms of the delivery of the curriculum, even in terms of maybe certain behaviors of faculty, maybe it's in terms of even small things like they can stand to speak up a little bit more, project a little bit so that we can hear them in the back. Little small things like that. Like we take all of the information, put it through the grinder and see if we can improve upon it either during the current academic year or queue it up for the next academic year.
Great.
And also, before I'm sorry, I didn't mean to, stop so early, but we're in another very interesting phase right now because being in the epicenter of, this unfortunate COVID-19 pandemic, our entire 4th unit or course that we call for our first year students has been delivered remotely. So I think we're all looking forward, whether we're, biting our nails or whatever the case is, looking forward to the feedback from the students in terms of how well of a job we've done and where we can improve in our methodology of delivering, the curriculum through distance learning. Because as you can imagine, there's been quite a challenge to take things like, sessions that involve dissectors and gross anatomy and making them as digital as possible and trying to keep lectures as synchronous as possible, as interactive as possible. So we're looking forward to that, considering the state that we're in, in the event that we have to extend our distance learning position, we definitely want to take that in immediately and go into the next academic year, being a little bit stronger and better at what we already do.
Allie, yeah, that's great too that you've been able to pivot your evals just as quickly with everything else that you've had to change. It'll be interesting to see that kind of feedback. Austin, I see you unmuted.
Yeah, no, I was just going to comment. I love how you guys were focusing on not just like the evaluations, like the fact that you're doing evaluations, but even the design of them, whether you're, what types of questions you're using, Floyd, and how you're asking those questions, Jessica. I think sometimes, that is, as or more important than the fact that you're just doing them themselves, because a poorly designed evaluation is maybe going to give you flawed data. So it's obviously you guys have done your research on that. And Jessica, I love the, 3 things 3 strengths of the course and 3 weaknesses, like being very direct and, asking for specific feedback from students, because I think students always want specific feedback from us. So we should probably return, that, in terms of they want specific feedback from the faculty, I should say. So we should, probably treat them with that same type of mentality. So yeah, that's really cool.
That's a great point to think about evaluating your evaluations like that. But that is a great way to go about it. Before I get to my next question, I do have a question from the audience, and anyone feel free to jump in. When you do your evaluations, how long do you keep them open for students to complete?
We open our end of course evaluations at the last day of the course, and they're open for about a week.
Okay. And is it mandatory for students to complete them?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
And the same goes for the faculty evaluations.
Okay. Floyd?
Yes, pretty much the same here. For the faculty, it is absolutely mandatory that we normally keep them open for about a week. And we offer both a mid-unit and an end-of-course evaluation period. So they're getting the ones that are submitted for the mid-unit are really used as reference for, especially if there's any, room for improvement, things that they can, work on. So we give them the second half of the course to make those improvements, and it's the end-of-unit evaluations that are considered and put forward into their final grade for that course. And we keep those open at both periods of time for a week each. And for the students, we ask them to complete a weekly survey just to get feedback on the courses that they've just completed, the events that they've completed that week for the course, for everything in terms of material, faculty, time spent, all of that. So that also is, we keep those open for a couple of days because we don't want them bogged down too much with thinking about the, having to go back and remember on Friday what they did on Monday. So we tend to leave it open at the very beginning of the course knowing that the schedule is already laid out for the week. So they can work incrementally as they fill this out. So there's not too much of a bear to sit down and have to do it in one sitting.
And is that weekly eval that you have them do, is that just one for all courses, or do you do an individual one for each course?
It's not for all courses, it's the same format. The only thing that changes is the actual events that they're attending, so that it's fluid.
Great. Thanks, guys. And thank you for the question that's posted. And again, if there are any other questions from the audience, feel free to throw them right into the Q&A feature, and I'll do my best to sneak them in when we can.
Hey, Dan, I did want to just hop into that question real quick. In terms of, when your evaluations are open and for how long, I know, one of the things you might be thinking about with that is response rates, right? And, as Jessica said, evaluations are required. But I know even with required evaluations, there's always those few students that don't quite, cross the finish line with their evals. So, but one of the great things I'm going to offer a plug for Leo here, and just point out that, one of the great parts of evals in Leo is that you can kind of set up a custom reminder schedule for those evaluations. And so you can have those reminders go out to whoever the evaluator is, whether it's a student or a faculty member, and so that they can get reminded of that periodically while that evaluation is open. And then you can also send, spur of the moment reminders. If you have just that one or two students that you need to, hey, gentle nudge, you can send those out, as well as keeping track of who all has completed those in the system. So it's one of the helpful parts of the system when it comes to evals, I think.
Yes, and I can actually I can co-sign that, unsolicited, because we rely on that very heavily, and there may be a couple of people from my Office of Medical Education that are co-defendants with me on this point, where we make use of, as we're migrating from a current software system to deliver evaluations. We make very heavy use of both the technical automated reminders during the course of that week. And, it's smart enough to know who's completed versus who hasn't completed. So it's only going to nudge those who haven't yet completed as we get closer to the due date. And sometimes we also have to follow that up with an actual email, or when we're actually on campus, knock on the door in their office and saying, hey, we know you're busy, but, this is very key to the students receiving their feedback so they can improve for the second half of the course, things like that. So seeing that work in Leo, huge lift on us. It's something that we're extremely looking forward to utilizing 100%.
Yeah, for any of those of you that have done the evals in a more archaic way back in the day, I'm sure it was always fun trying to chase down students. I actually remember several years ago, I'm going to date myself, this is 8 years ago, kind of hanging around outside classrooms to try and get students to complete these mandatory evaluations so that their grades weren't held up, because that was the policy at the school I worked at the time. So having an auto reminder would have been a godsend at that point. I actually, before I continue on, I do have another question from our attendees. So what type of questions are used in your faculty eval, and how are they used, and how do you deal with issues of student bias? So when they evaluate their faculty, how do you deal with student bias in there?
Well, I guess I can start off. And just a side note, I'm happy to share our newly revised course and faculty evaluations for anyone that's interested. And I'm kind of have a template that I'm referencing, but if anyone wants just a copy, I'm happy to share that. As far as questions that we ask, we have some Likert scale questions to start off, similar to our course evaluations. Did the instructor communicate clearly their expectations for learning? Were the slide or instructional materials, were they clear, appropriate, were they effective? The instructor effectively taught to my current level of understanding. That's something that also we've seen in comments. Sometimes they teach beyond the scope of maybe that's necessary. They focus on the most relevant content, teaching according to the learning objectives. Did they promote a culture of respect and inclusiveness for all students? Did they encourage student participation? And we had a last one that, or not one of the last ones that we were kind of debating on, but this kind of draws back to some instructional design principles, but we have one that says, I feel confident I have achieved the learning objectives based on what I learned from this instructor. So it's not just about the instructor, it's kind of tossing it back to them, like, how do I feel like I've learned? And so that will be interesting to get some feedback on. And then, like the course evaluations, we have the 1 to 3 specific strengths and 1 to 3 specific things they can improve to better support their learning. As far as battling student bias, that's a great question. Because we do have some instructors that teach more frequently or in multiple courses than others. I'm gonna have to keep thinking on that one, honestly.
Yeah, we can let's see if anyone else. I don't have an answer for that either, but maybe Austin and Floyd do.
I'll say the first part of that question. Our feedback to the faculty from the students is very much mirrored. We try to keep things as, I don't want to say generic, but in a way that is structured around whether or not learning objectives are being met, the value of the materials, things of that nature. If you can repeat the second part of that question, I'll take a stab at it. I'll be brave.
Yeah, absolutely. So let me just pull it back up here. The second part of that question is, how do you deal with issues of student bias? Student bias.
Mm-hmm. Don't want to take the cheap way out here because this is a very honest answer. I think in a lot of cases, we keep our students very busy, and they see a lot of different faculty over just the course of a single week in their courses. So I don't think, just jogging my memory based on feedback that we've collected, I don't recall seeing a lot of instances of student feedback, but it is something still that we try to monitor. We use a term called doves versus hawks, both for students and also for faculty when it comes to things like grading or evaluations. There's going to be certain faculty that are, a little bit more forgiving for, little slight inequities, and, same thing with students. So we'll, make mental notes of doves versus hawks in that case. And we'll always, we kind of take our data as we collect it. It's somewhat of a virtual parking lot per se. So before it ever gets published or seen by anyone, faculty feedback from the students gets reviewed by the course director and by the dean before it gets compiled and put into a report and sent to the faculty for them to see. So if we ever need to clean something up, just in case of language or things like that, and not that it's ever bad, but you always want to we promote, one of the competencies that we grade our students on is medical professionalism. So that's something that, we want to make sure is, kept across the board on both sides.
Yeah, I don't know about you guys, but I'm totally here for the SUNY downstate analogies there. Pizza and now doves versus hawks. I love that. We have a couple other great questions rolling in. Don't worry, I'm going to get to them. I'm going to kind of scoot them to the back of the hour. I think they just kind of fit there a little bit, and I'm going to move into some of the another item I want to make sure we get to, because I know that all our panelists here have some great thoughts on that, and that's about student feedback and student learning. So much of what we've talked about just right now, we dabbled on a little bit of student side, has been about students creating evaluations for faculty and what you guys do at your institutions to improve your programs, teaching, and those things. So again, I'm sorry, Jessica, I keep throwing you on the hot seat to start, but so how have evaluations positively influenced student learning in your program? And do you have any plans for how to change that going forward if you're looking to improve that?
Sure. Yeah. So I think kind of like what I mentioned a little bit before, I think the students really appreciate getting some qualitative feedback. As far as you're referring, just so I'm understanding right, the faculty evaluations of students, or
I am, and thank you for clarifying the question.
Okay. So I know we have the both sides, so no, you're fine. So yeah, I'm thinking back to, once again, the evaluations we use for our CPS sessions. And so since those are not factoring into their overall course grades, it takes off some pressure, and they can really just focus on the learning and identify what areas they're doing, they need to improve upon without having, like I said, all that pressure. I also think their evaluations help them see as the time is more worthwhile. I mean, it's not just the end point of the exam. I mean, they're using that time more purposefully. And I think they appreciate having a voice, as far as their evaluations of faculty. Now I'm starting to think back again. So I guess you have both of those sides.
Okay. And then is that most prevalently in that clinical problem solving that you mentioned before, where you see students getting that feedback?
I would say so, because then once you start to look at like performance assessments using rubrics that are factoring towards a grade, I guess those are not so much evaluations. I guess if we're defining evaluations, mostly just feedback based that don't count towards a grade.
Okay, great. Yeah, Floyd, same question at SUNY, impacting student learning with evals.
Yeah, I think the students are very, and both sides, but I know we're focusing more on faculty evaluation of students. The students are really appreciative and take a lot of value in our midpoint evaluations during each course, because it gives them a window of opportunity to improve wherever necessary. And also at that point, we make it a point through the evaluations and also personally through faculty and our senior leadership of education, that doors are open for them to receive tutoring. We have other programs, sub-programs that are available, so that they can avoid the dreaded remediation period. And remediation very quickly for us is, and it's probably the same in other institutions, is, if you happen to fail one of your courses during the academic year, then you're going to be spending some time during the summer making up that course and, having to review materials that you did or competency. And we're pretty hardcore with, even in the course, we have 6 different competencies. If you fail one of those 6 competencies, you fail the entire course. So they very, very, very much value any kind of feedback, particularly at the midpoint, because they still have that window of opportunity to improve. And I think the layout and the format of our evaluations are such that we see a general mixed balance of the canned questions that we offer. So you can do a multi-select to say that, yeah, you're meeting your requirements for this competency, you're meeting it for this, things that you can improve upon. They are very appreciative, even more so, for the open text comments. We have a lot of evaluators that prefer to not go with the canned questions. We give them the option. If you don't want to take one of the canned selections, you want to make it specific to the student, then you can go right ahead and just give them as much feedback as possible. And we encourage both approaches.
Same question, Austin.
Yeah, so I see evaluations impact student learning in all kinds of ways. Even, I know this, Dan, you mentioned faculty evaluation of students, but if you think about allowing students to evaluate a course, or faculty is going to eventually impact their learning in the future. If they have that same faculty member teach in the next course, or it's going to impact the learning for the students coming behind them potentially. So there's lots of ways that those evaluations can impact, even those evaluations of the courses impact student learning. But when you get into faculty evaluation of students, like Floyd was saying, I think it's so critical that you have the ability for the evaluator to quantify the student's performance. Like he was saying with, kind of the open-ended questions, but then you can't just leave it at that. You have to give them, as Floyd said so eloquently, the opportunity to explain those comments or explain that value that they assigned. And so that's a really great way to think about, that you are giving them concrete feedback. It's not just this abstract form that they receive. And then going beyond that, what I'm really interested in is institutions taking an opportunity. Floyd, I love the midpoint evals that you mentioned. So that formative assessment opportunity for students, partially through the course. Then I would like to also see schools start to utilize more self-evaluations. So allowing students to evaluate themselves as well. I think that's something that would be beneficial in terms of students reflecting. We talk about reflection a lot in education and how important that is for the learning process. So allowing those students to reflect on their learning as well. So, but all of these are awesome examples of, when it comes to learning, I think feedback and reflection are 2 critical components. If you read, if you get a degree in education, you're going to learn about feedback and reflection. So I think those are some things that we can definitely focus on there.
Yeah, and I think, oh, go ahead, Jessica.
No, go ahead. It's fine.
I was just gonna, I think that all of you guys have touched on an important point, is the timeliness of that feedback as well. So being able to actually use it as a formative feedback, and not always something that's at the end of the semester, both sides. I mean, learning how to improve your course for your current students and not just waiting for the next cohort, the next calendar year, and also for students to be able to make sure that they're improving now, learning and improving now. And Floyd brought up the dreaded word we all want to avoid of remediation. So if we can be more proactive about that, hopefully we can get that information to students quickly to avoid that.
I was just going to say, I like how Austin and Floyd, you were talking about doing more formative types of evaluations, having the midpoint evaluation, something that we've considered at our institution doing more as well. I think the challenge that we're still kind of grappling with is how to get more formative feedback for our courses and faculty without inducing that survey fatigue. So I know that's something it's easy to do as well. So I don't know if you all want to chip in some more of that, like how you balance, or not, if you just ask certain parts of your cohorts, or if you get, if there's this cycle that you go through. I mean, I'm just curious too, to get some feedback as well when I heard about that.
Sure. So the format of our formative versus our final summative evaluations is the same question base. The only thing that really changes is a rating. For our formative, we ask for a rating on the competencies of whether or not they meet criteria versus whether it needs improvement. For the assessment, then it's either they met criteria or it was unsatisfactory. Unsatisfactory has more of a final stamp, and that's the one that goes to the grade book. And that's the dreaded word that they want to avoid. But outside of that, the questions are very much the same, because if we ever do want to, or if the students want to take advantage of open door policy of our deans, our associate deans, the faculty, it gives them, they're measuring apples versus apples. Question 1A on a formative versus question 1A on a summative, to see how they trended, either upward or downward.
All great stuff. Thanks, guys. We have about 8 minutes before I'm going to use the last 10 minutes to just take those questions from our audience right now. So in the last 8 minutes, one thing that I wanted to touch on was just the value for you guys in using your evals as part of what you also use as an LMS, and is there an ease with that? Is there, how does that help you be more efficient in your school or in your program?
Sure. I also don't mind putting a little plug for Leo on this one, because I'm serious. Because that is our LMS that we use. And I think content management is really helpful, is having it all in one place. It's very easy to find things and store things. That also gives way to efficiency, because it makes the process of building and sending out and tracking evaluations a lot faster. And then security too. I mean, I'd say that having a secure platform and having, once again, that in one place, and knowing that you're sending those evaluations to students that have been imported into the system, and you're not just copying and pasting emails, all the time, like that's helpful, that you don't have to worry about that extra step.
Floyd?
Sure. For us, it's a huge value in terms of improvement of efficiency. Our Central Office of Medical Education, which includes myself and up to 10 or 12 other individuals, we share a lot of workload in a lot of different ways, more so on the technical side, where I can speak to, we're slowly starting to migrate from a place of having so many different components of delivering and assessing our students through the curriculum, and using so many different technologies and tools. You have, several Excel spreadsheets sitting over here, and then you have evaluations being done in this system, and you have assessments being done in a different system. So now, another downstate phrase, now starting to do things the Leo way, we can bring everything under one umbrella, and also from a technical standpoint, when it comes to authentication, we have less to worry about, where the person saying, well, I can get into this system, but I can't get into that system. It kind of alleviates and mitigates a lot of those issues from a technical standpoint, and it helps our IT department from that perspective to bring everything together. But in terms of data collection, assessments, formatives, and the schedule and who's done what, and be able to run all of these wonderful reports that are available in Leo, it's just saved so many person hours for us, and we're just looking forward to doing a lot more, bringing more under the same umbrella.
Austin, do you have anything to add?
No, I'm glad to hear you guys talk about how Leo is helpful in that regard, in terms of keeping everything kind of consistent, like you were saying, Jessica, all in one place, and there's fewer places to go to, like you were saying, Floyd. I know we've probably all worked, we all have a different work history, and we've all been in different places. I know from my own experience, I've been in places where it was very much disjointed, and you were going, here for one thing and here for something else. And so when I first started using Leo as a user, that was one of the things I really liked about it, is that all of these different components that we touched every day, were kind of in one place, and you could pull those reports out and see those connections that you make between, whether it's evals or curriculum mapping, and how evals are, you could have students evaluate in a certain component of your curriculum, and so you can tie those dots together. So, yeah.
Great. Thank you all for that. That was great. We're going to move on to a few of our audience questions, and we'll put a bow on this hour. Again, if you are interested in having, or if you have a question for Austin, Jessica, or Floyd, feel free to throw it in the Q&A, and we will make sure to do our best to get to it at this time. So let's jump right into, I had them flagged here. So, are your evaluations anonymous or confidential? I have a couple questions to this. Do you review comments that are unprofessional and determine that the student completed the evaluation? And then what do you do with students that turn in unprofessional comments? So 3 things. Is it confidential? Do you review for unprofessional comments? And if you do have those, what do you do about the unprofessional comments?
I may have to ask you to reiterate the other two, but the first one, I believe they're confidential to the extent that when we review the data, we don't see the names right next to the comments and whatnot. So we can pull up an individual student's evaluation if we need to. So I guess that comes into play if we have a really inappropriate or unprofessional comment. That's something that we can then address with that student. But as far as just the general, I run the report of the course faculty evaluation, just see the data and the comments, all of that is stripped of the student data.
Okay.
Second question was?
Just if there is something unprofessional,
okay.
how is that addressed? Yeah, and you.
Right, we thankfully we haven't run into that issue too much, but if we do, then we'll forward that or draw that to the attention of our dean of curriculum, and so he will then reach out to that student and go from there.
Anybody else have anything to add on that?
Yeah, from the faculty evaluating the students, we're very transparent with that because we want the comments, we want their evaluations to be targeted to each individual student. However, students evaluating faculty, those we do those blinded, so we don't know, we know it's the collectors of the data, but when it's, released, collated and released to the faculty, we don't have names attached to them at all. And, we do the parking lot before publish. We take that approach just to clean up anything that may not be suitable for, consumption.
Yeah, that's great. I love, Floyd, you've got the great analogies today, man. That's excellent. Yeah, those, I think it's important to note that in Leo, there are lots of, settings in place to allow that confidentiality of the student submitted evaluations to be only available, as you guys have pointed out, to like a centralized group of individuals who administer those evaluations. And Jessica, I definitely agree with your best practice of, we don't look at individual comments unless it's pertinent or, necessary to know for, various reasons, as you can all imagine. But it is, important to note that, those students do have that confidentiality based upon the settings that program puts in place. So
I do have a more than a few questions for Jessica about sharing your revised questions. For those of you that are interested in that, in the chat, I threw in my email address and Austin's email addresses. Sorry, Jessica, I didn't know yours off the top of my head, although I probably should. Feel free to just reach out to Austin or myself, and we will most certainly get that information to Jessica, because I think you verbally said already you're willing to share.
Oh, for sure. Yeah,
okay.
I'm happy to share it.
Great. Thank you. I'm glad I didn't put words in your mouth on that one. Okay. A few more questions before we're completed today. So Floyd, I have a specific one for you, my friend. You mentioned previously that you're moving away from your course evaluation system. And could you just speak to the features in Leo and the evaluation system that helped you make that decision?
Sure. So I think I had mentioned before, it was there were a few things that were mirrored from our old system to Leo, with the automatic reminders. But one of the very, very key things that sold us on this part was the fact that, we're looking at marrying the students to the faculty. And again, we are dealing with PBLs in small groups of 12 out of a cohort of 210 students. So we literally have to take manual time to make sure that, okay, we have this survey, and we're going to attach photos to it. That's also a very manual process to attach the students' headshots, so that when the faculty is filling it out, they're going through their list of 12 students in their group. They see the photos, they see the names, and all of that programming that it takes to put that together to make it work. So we're literally taking survey software and making it do evaluations and throwing as much intelligence behind it as possible. Leo already has that inherent intelligence built in. It already has the students' headshots, because we when we upload the new cohort of students. So it already ties the students together. And because we're doing only one particular or two particular session types, it has the intelligence to know that as you select that event type and you take the range of time that the students are being evaluated on, Leo just wraps it up all together for you as you build it. And you say, from this time to this time, this modality does it for you. All of that manual work, all of those hours immediately goes out the window. All you do is just schedule, say, hit send an email reminder out every 2 or 3 days, and just kind of watch it as it rolls in.
Great, thank you for that. I have another toughie, and then so two more, and we'll get out on this. So, how do your institutions or institutions you've worked at handle faculty whose students feel are demonstrating bias and mistreatment? How do you address faculty that feel that there's bias from students? And I'm gonna, all three of you, anybody?
Yeah, that's definitely a worthwhile question to ask and to answer. So I personally am not as involved in addressing those particular issues, but I have heard that occasionally when students raise concerns that they were not evaluated fairly, then it goes to the course director. And in those particular cases, they were standardized patient encounters that were recorded. So we had that ability to go back, and the course director basically regraded. So in that case, it was more of an assessment than an evaluation. But if you don't have that capability, I mean, I don't know if you could have that student redo whatever they were being evaluated on. I don't know if there's that kind of flexibility, but I mean, that's what I have seen so far.
Yeah, we have a couple of different, I don't know if they're necessary solutions or, mitigating methods. But for one, we do have, for each student year or matriculating year, we have a group of students called the SLC, the Student Leadership Council. And they tend to be the voices of the student body at large. So if there's any, issues that seem to be bubbling up, whether it be faculty, whether it be the facilities, maybe audio video is not working well in one of the lecture halls. anything that pertains to student learning and their experience. They meet on a regular basis, and they also fill out their own separate survey to provide feedback on behalf of the student body as a whole. So just having these extra divisions somehow allows them to be, the representative mouthpiece for the rest of the students, rather than getting into a one-on-one, because although we do also like to direct our students to their course director for, any specific issues from an individual, perspective, but if it's more than just one or two students having individual issues, then we absolutely empower the Student Leadership Council to speak up on their behalf through regular in-person meetings and also through their surveys.
That's great, Floyd. I think too, like you kind of hit the nail on the head when you talked about, not having that one-on-one, faculty versus student scenario play out. And so any way that you can think of, as you said, to kind of mitigate, you may not ever prevent all of that fully, but, some things you can put in place to kind of, as you said, mitigate that happening. And another thing institutions might think of are instituting peer evaluations. So thinking about, if it's a small group or a project problem-based learning, Jessica, with the clinical problem-solving sessions, if there were peer evaluations that students were completing as well, then granted, you can't maybe put as much stock into peer evaluations as you could a faculty evaluation of a student. But if you would probably see some discrepancies if, there was a problem, or maybe you might see some similarities if they're actually, the faculty was evaluating fairly. So that might be another source you could go to. So you have, we have this over here and this over here. So do they say the same thing, or do they tell different stories?
Yeah, and one thing, this doesn't address the the problem directly, but it's one thing I've done in the past is just through training of faculty and actually of students too, in filling the evals out. So showing faculty a video of this is what would be a perfect score from a student, and this is what we would consider to be so many points off. You still want to allow them to use their judgment, but at least to give them a framework, especially the newer folks that are new to the program, or newer clinicians that are visiting, just to give them just some framework. And I think it provides them a little bit of a sense of comfort of where their expectations should be. Because I think one of the things that we run into is that folks have, we have the doves and the hawks. And so folks also have different expectations between those doves and hawks, I'm sure. So that getting out in front of it has been something I've seen kind of be helpful for our schools in the past. So with that, everyone, we actually finished right around on time. I just want to take a quick moment to thank Jessica and Floyd and Austin for being our panelists today and sharing all the great work that you all are doing. Again, we appreciate all the attendees that took time out of your busy and probably hectic days. So thank you all for spending some time with us today. Just to reiterate, this has been recorded and will be sent out to you within the next 24 hours. And if you have any questions, feel free to follow up with the emails that are in the chat for Austin and I. And I also put a link in there to our website. If you do have any questions, you can just reach directly out to Da Vinci. So again, thanks everybody, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks everybody.